Hello and welcome to Business at Citywatch. I'm Michael. We thank you for joining us, and I remind you to please give us a mention on any of your reviews. That would be appreciated wherever you happen to pick up your podcast. We're talking today with Chuck Temple. Chuck is a kind of person that helps you assess risk in your business, especially if you're just getting started, and how to mitigate some of those problems that may arise after you've been in business. He has a new book out, and Chuck, give me the title of the book.
Yeah, the book is Startup to Sold, and it's good to be here.
All right, great. Let's talk a little bit about this. When businesses get started, especially small and mid-sized businesses, and they come to you for advice with regard to assessing what kind of risk they might be involved in their markets, what's one of the first things you say to them?
So one of the first things I ask them to do, I kind of have a model where it's always good. These are for newer companies. It's where you're trying to do a cheap test before a more expensive test before a more expensive test. So that's the strategy that I usually go with, and I can explain that a little more in detail if you'd like.
Okay, go ahead.
So the first step when you have an idea is basically you're trying to test the idea as cheap as possible. That means calling your friends, calling family, things like that. They're a lot of times they're going to give you more positive feedback than the market will, but that's the really cheapest thing that you can do is just start telling people about the idea. The next step is to try to talk to people that you don't know because they're going to give you a little bit better feedback. And one of the really good ways to do that for a lot of the startups and small businesses is actually at places like farmers markets. If your product or service lends itself, and a lot of products and services actually do, even if you have an app idea, different things like that, for pretty inexpensive, you can get a booth. You just rent a table, rent a booth. The farmers market folks will help you, and then the real gem is that you can talk to a ton of people, sometimes 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 people. It's a very busy farmers market. And you can pitch them on your idea, and you can start seeing what they say, see what their objections are, refine your pitch. It's like the fast track to getting your business idea kind of vetted by people that you don't know.
Okay.
So those are the first two quickest ways to assess the risk, because the biggest risk is you don't have product market fit. Of all the businesses that fail, I believe that's the number one thing that they fail. That's why I had one startup out of my 5 that I did, and it failed, and that was the reason why, product market fit.
Okay, I want to talk a little bit about that, but I think what we'll do is we'll go to break and come back, and then we'll hit that a little bit harder. We'll be right back. Citywatch on the Air, heard locally and worldwide on iHeartRadio.com, takes you through the ins and outs of business, exactly what your business needs to showcase your product or service. And we can do it for as little as $10 a week. If you don't believe me, text PROVE IT to 310-291-2790. That's PROVE IT to 310-291-2790. Okay, we are back with Chuck Temple, and we were talking about assessing market risk in developing and starting your own businesses, small, mid-sized, whatever. And we talked about market fit before we went to the break. Give me a little bit more on market fit and how you might think that you're the best business for this particular market and find out you're not. How does that happen?
Well, that happens all too often, I think. This is a very, very common problem is, you get an idea in your head and to you it's the most amazing thing ever, but are people going to actually pay real money for that? And a lot of times the answer is no, but the trick is, right, the most important thing for the risk assessment and mitigation is you have to spend as little as possible to find out if you have a product market fit or not. And so I think I mentioned, doing phone calls and then talking to real people at something like a farmer's market, right, which might only cost you $100. And then basically you're going up from there. Maybe the next step is you build a website and you hack together something that can mimic the solution and see if you can get even one customer. It's the right thing to do before you spend $50,000 building an app, or you rent an office, or these other things, right? It's all about figuring out ways to test your business without having to spend a ton of money and time.
Can you get an assessment like that in a one-day situation? In other words, if you rent the booth at the farmers market and you listen to people and you get that, say you get those 100 people to give you feedback, can you put together a fair assessment based on that, or do you have to go back a couple of times?
It just really depends on what they say. If they're ready to pull out their credit card right then and there, then you probably are you can move along, right? Yeah. But if everybody kind of gives you one out of maybe 3 or 4 different objections or questions, and nobody is asking you the price and the different things like that, then you maybe you might need to go back to the drawing board, or figure out a different or just like a slight pivot to your product or service.
Yeah, the reason I ask that is because I know that you can wind up at the farmers market on the wrong day. Do you know what I mean? Where you wind up talking to people who are interested in garden supplies, and you sell widgets. Do you know what I mean? That kind of thing.
Yeah, that's true. It has to be the right people, right? So that's true. I used to go for my first company, the one that I wrote the book about. I went to 3 different farmers markets, and only 1 out of the 3 did I ever get actual customers from. However, all of them were actually interested in the product, so I knew I had something that seemed valuable. But finding the ones that were actually going to pay, it was actually just one of those 3 markets that I was doing. Mm-hmm. But if at all of them, everyone, nobody even gave me the time of day, then I probably knew that I didn't have anything too good going.
Okay. Now let's say that you've had the chance to talk to people. You've put together a fairly decent idea as to what you want to do. And then you start something, and then you start to develop problems with it. It doesn't work the way you wanted it to, or it's not working as fast as you want it to, that kind of thing. How do you fix those problems? How do you approach that?
Yeah, I think every business will have those. I've never heard of a business that ever went smooth, right? My first business, I thought I could scan slides. It was a media transfer company. I could throw them into a slide scanner, 50 at a time, go surfing for an hour, and come back. And that was what I thought would happen. But it never does happen like that. And I think that, there's no one size fits all for every business problem. But I do think that there's the right mentality that any entrepreneur would need to have in order to get through it, right? Number one is understanding that that there's always going to be the challenge, and it's the person that has the grit and the determination to realize that this is kind of those problems that you're encountering are actually barriers to entry for everybody, and by you getting past them, it moves you further from the pack, so that if someone else did start another company that's similar to yours, that you've already overcome some hurdles, right? So I think it's in every business case, right? There's going to be different hurdles, but being able to be that person that has the grit, determination, etc., to believe in themselves, to know that they can continue to overcome them, and to think positive is the key. And the way that I do that personally, I use a weird form. I studied psychology and neuroscience in college, right? And so my personal trick that I do, it's kind of silly, but if I know that I need to overcome some problem in my mind, I just believe that I've already overcome it. I kind of like get myself to believe that, right? Then my brain is like trying to catch up to what I've told it to believe, right? So there's a sense of cognitive dissonance, like a separation between where I am now and where my mind believes it is, right? then what happens is I don't have to really do as much. My brain will end up just, in its subconscious, kind of on the back burner, just continually churn at this problem, whether I'm consciously aware of it or not. Of course, I am going to work on it consciously as well. But what happens is that I've got all parts of my brain working to overcome this particular obstacle. And that's how I've been successful personally, is basically tricking my brain into thinking that is what, that's what's actually happening. And that's a trick that I picked up from this book called Think and Grow Rich. And if you ever get the chance to read that one, that's I think it's a seminal kind of success book.
So it's a positive thinking approach then, I guess, is what I'm just think positively toward it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. We are going to come back and do a couple of closing minutes with Chuck right after this. City Watch on the Air, heard locally and worldwide on iHeartRadio.com, takes you through the ins and outs of business, exactly what your business needs to showcase your product or service. And we can do it for as little as $10 a week. If you don't believe me, text PROVE IT to 310-291-2790. That's PROVE IT to 310-291-2790. All right, we are back with Chuck Temple, and we were talking about business risk. For those of you who missed the first part, sorry about that, but I think you'll like this last part here. We talked about business risk. We also talked about consideration with regard to the risk. Now, here's the thing we didn't touch too much on before, Chuck. When you're considering the risk, when you're saying, well, I've got this feedback, I've had a chance to talk to the people, I've got an idea on what I want to do, I've had some problems, but I've overcome them. How do you then determine if you have a viable entity here to work with now that you've taken care of some of the problems? Do you proceed with it, or do you just let it go because it's just going to be too problematic in the future?
Assuming that you're overcoming problems and you are pivoting when necessary, you're listening to actual customers or potential customers, that's the startup work for sure. And if you're doing those things and you are noticing that more and more people are interested in your product, your service, whatever, then that's when you really turn on the gas and step on the gas pedal, right? And you move forward as fast as possible.
Okay. And so the basic thing you tell people when they come to you and they say, I have a business that I'm thinking about starting, or I'm having some trouble with the business I've already started, you sit them down and you tell them what?
Well, I'm first gonna ask them why they need my help, right? And figure all that kind of stuff out. But if they have, if maybe you could just tell me the question again.
Okay, just basically you're sitting with someone and they're either starting a business or they're in a business right now, and they're trying to figure out whether or not to move forward. So they're talking about they're considering their risk consideration. Are we talking about just keep plugging as long as you're making a buck, keep going? Or are you saying, well, you should pivot here and try and get this done, or pivot there and get that done? What are we talking about when you sit down and talk with them?
I would look at specifically where they feel like their risk is. So if their risk is, AI is going to take over and shut them down, right? There could be a million different things. But I would look at, I think it all goes back to the finances. If they, if a good portion of their business is something that they feel like has a giant risk to it through technology or a competitor, things like that, the number one thing that I would do is look at how much of their business is from that channel that they determine is risky. And if it's a lot, then we'll focus on it. And if it is not a lot, then maybe it's better to put more resources in what is working and has less risk.
Okay, well, again, we were talking with Chuck Temple. We've been talking about business risk. Chuck, if somebody wants to talk to you, how would they get in touch with you?
They can go to chucktemple.com or startup2sold.com, and my contact information is right there.
Sounds good. Chuck Temple, thank you so much for being with us on Business at City Watch. And all the rest of you, I remind you, believe in yourself. If you don't, no one else will. And we will speak with you next time.